I've had Sasha on before. People loved her, thrilled to have her back. A lot has happened since Sasha was last on. One of the things, of course, is the Signal chat, where the top security officials in the country were using Signal to communicate about attack plans in advance. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about all of it and more. But welcome, Sasha Ingber. Welcome back.
Hey, good to see you. And I just want to make clear that I'm not in my bedroom. I am in a hotel room in Michigan, and it's good to be with you to talk about SignalGate.
SignalGate, indeed. So I have to say, there is a story about Congressman Himes uh, asking questions of Director Tulsi Gabbard at a congressional hearing. And there are stories that extend out the hearing transcript, making up a dialogue between the two to make it worse for Tulsi Gabbard. And it was already bad enough for my estimation. When the director of national intelligence is asked a question by a congressman, and congressman says, "Hey, you retweeted a contributor to Russia Today, Russian state TV," and the US Director of National Intelligence basically responds like a 12-year-old and says, "No, that's from my private email, and I'm just using my First Amendment rights, right? I have my those are my own views." And so it's astonishing to watch that. But all of these questions are in the context of the senior officials of the government communicating with each other on Signal, which is a confidential commercial app in the US government. The Signal Corps of the US Army communicates on the behalf of all of the senior officials and makes the arrangements that they are on impenetrable classified networks. None of that was used. So, at any rate, I'm reading this story about the testimony with Gabbard and Himes. I'm like, look, again, right? Fake story. And that was my exact reaction when I read the SignalGate story. I thought that someone has concocted a Jeffrey Goldberg Atlantic story, and it has come into my orbit, so to speak, through my kind of information pipeline, how I consume news, and it's good, right? It's like it's not, but there's no way it can be real. but but
Yeah.
but it was real. And so I like to ask you just to talk about, how did you learn about it? What was your reaction to it? And what was the reaction if I held a gun to your head and I said, just what is the reaction of the mean of the intelligence community? Not the most underreactive person and not the angriest person. If you can find the middle spot where the most people are,
Yeah.
what is
Yeah.
that? So
Right.
over to you and welcome, and we're thrilled to have you. And everybody, you can find Sasha. Please tell them where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great to be with you tonight, Steve. I have a Substack called Human, which of course is human intelligence. It's stories that relate to the intel community, often from a human perspective. And I'll tell you that I also host the International Spy Museum's podcast, Spycast, where I tell stories on covert action and espionage. And a colleague actually texted me the article, and I just jaw dropped. I mean, I could not believe it. I would have loved to interview Goldberg a day after this happened. Of course, he's going on CNN and all the other shows, but it was just wild because you couldn't even imagine having that kind of access, that it happened accidentally. One thing that's notable to me is that The Atlantic is a very credible publication that is critical of Democrats and Republicans, but has a reputation of being a little bit more to the left than to the right. And so there was a narrative that got to be built that this is a publication that is critical of Trump, which is convenient for him. Imagine if this had come out on, say, Breitbart or One America News Network. I mean, we don't even know if they would release a story like this, but it definitely changed the dynamics that it came out through Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor in chief of The Atlantic. I do think that that is a part of what this story is and what the implications are for media. So, some of my initial thoughts. When it comes to the national security concerns and what I've been hearing, there are a lot of people who were really shocked and really disturbed. They were very unsettled by the fact that top security officials would take these steps. There are classified systems, there are secure methods. Yes, as John Radcliffe testified in the same hearing as Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard testified, the CIA testified, or the CIA director testified, that Signal was approved as a form of communication, but it has been hacked, and we can get into that later. And I think a lot of people who work in the intelligence community, especially in the counterintelligence community, people inside, people who have left, were very unsettled by how cavalier the members in this group could be. I mean, we mentioned the fact that Tulsi Gabbard was involved in this conversation, and the fact that she was traveling. We also know that Steve Witkoff, the special envoy who has been negotiating with Russia, was in Moscow to meet with Putin during the communication of this. And really, what the ramifications will be if there is no investigation here. The safety of the combat flyers when information is coming out in real time in preparation for the military strike on the Houthis in Yemen. What else could have been discussed? We're learning more about that right now. The Washington Post just reporting that Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, had previous conversations on Signal to do with Russia, to do with Somalia. I think there's a lot of questions of why are these the systems that are being used here. A guy like Mike Waltz is a former Green Beret, first person of that stature to be elected to Congress. And how does he not know better? Um, Another question: how does this affect recruiting, and what does this mean for intelligence sharing? Uh, does it mean that there are going to be more concerns and hesitation to bring intelligence to the United States, to share sources and methods, any kind of information that could be compromised, as we saw in this Signal communication, whereby, according to the Wall Street Journal, a human source on the ground in Yemen, who was working with the Israelis, was mentioned. That was very concerning to the Israelis. And I'll have a lot more to say on that. But I think that's where a lot of people are wondering, why did this happen? And what more do we need to be worried about?
Why did it happen?
Yeah.
As best you can tell.
Yeah. That's a question of speculation. And it's hard to say because, of course, we all can rewind time and go back to Hillary Clinton and her emails. It seems like people are using different communications in ways that are hypocritical at this point. I wonder if it was, a
Let
question
me
of convenience or.
um do you have any sense of, or does anybody in the intelligence community have an opinion, psychologically, I guess, is that you have going back a decade now. You have Secretary Clinton's emails. Donald Trump hoards classified information. There's classified information that's found in Biden's garage. Trump comes back into power. You would think, why would these people, you have the US Army there,
Mhm.
you have the signal intelligence, and the guy just says, we're going to use signal. And
Yeah.
Trump's real estate developer buddy is in Moscow. Does anybody think that that wasn't immediately penetrated in Moscow in the intelligence community, that they didn't have full access in real time? Does anybody think that the Russians did not break through the signal wall and would call for this?
I mean, about a month ago in February, Google's cybersecurity arm Mandiant put out a report on how Russia had hacked Signal. And incidentally, using that group invite link that we saw Mike Waltz use that inadvertently invited Jeffrey Goldberg to the conversation. Uh, what Mandiant found was that the Russians had been using that and the vulnerabilities of using QR codes since 2022. So this is not something new. The NSA also reportedly put out a bulletin around the same time as the Mandiant report, but this has been going on, and the Russians had been targeting Ukrainian military personnel since the full scale invasion began in 2022. Uh, but Signal is an encrypted communication system, but is not perfect. A former senior counterintelligence officer talked to me about how if one person is hacked, then that can affect the other person because the communication is happening on both sides. So if one phone is compromised, that still does damage to other people in the group. And here's the thing that I think is so fascinating. This person also talked about how the most safe way to use Signal is to delete your text messages. But of course, by deleting your text messages when you're part of a group of this nature, then you bump up against federal record keeping laws. So we know from Goldberg's writing that there was this set time when the messages would disappear. But part of the problem in this complicated text chain is that these messages should be preserved because of federal record keeping laws. So now we're actually bumping up between good cybersecurity measures and breaking federal law.
Okay. So this is where I was hoping you would go. So the only conceivable reason to use a confidential system that's less confidential than the government system, but Mike Walls and these guys estimate as confidential enough, is that it evades the public records request. That's the only thing I
Maybe.
can
I mean,
conceivably think that they
it's
would do
possible
this.
that there was a sense of expedience and ease to it as opposed to say entering into a skiff. Yes, they could have used JWIX, which is a communication system for classified information. There would be other ways, that's true. But I don't know. I don't It's hard for me to know what the cause is, but it's an important question. Absolutely.
Has anyone asked the question?
I'm sure there have been many people who've asked the question. And right now, I mean, look at how we've had calls from Democrats and Republicans for investigations in different ways. I mean, my God, I mean, it's hard to keep track of all of it now. But Democrats in the House Intel Committee, they want the Pentagon to, or they want an investigation. They wrote to Tulsi Gabbard, the top Democrat and Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee made a request to the Pentagon. Politico is reporting that the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee sent formal letters to Trump administration officials asking for transcribed interviews to try to put together the pieces of why this happened. And again, according to the Washington Post, this wasn't the first time. This was just the first time that we found out about it because a journalist ended up being brought into the fray.
I think it's the most incredible story of my lifetime of government incompetence. It is stunning. There's no words for it. And what I want everybody to understand, we have 2,000 people with us this evening, is what they did. Um, they put out in an electronic communication that was instantly hacked in Moscow. Almost certainly. Two things: the timing of the attack, which meant they disclosed the position of the aircraft carriers, which have more than 5,000 sailors on it. In the Second World War, one of the things that made FDR absolutely the angriest was the malicious decision by the editor of the Chicago conservative newspaper, Robert Colonel McCormick, to publish the fact that the U.S. had broken the Japanese codes, and that was why we had won the Battle of Midway. And but for the grace of God, uh, there was no Japanese agent, and nobody in Japan read the Chicago Tribune. Nobody read the Chicago Tribune. And so the Japanese didn't know that the codes were broken. And you look at D-Day,
Hmm.
a couple weeks before the invasion, classmate of Dwight Eisenhower's, who was a brevet major general, gets drunk and tells the bar that D-Day will happen before June 15th. Eisenhower jails his friend, strips him of his rank, demotes him back to lieutenant colonel, and sends him home. The sign above officer candidate school um, at the U.S. Marine Corps says ductos exemplos. It means lead by example. And that's not the standard at all now with anybody that leads the U.S. military, the intelligence services, or the FBI objectively. They now operate at a standard that is different, materially so. Anybody in a subordinate position did what they did, they would be arrested
You
and
know,
they would
I'm
be
actually very
incarcerated.
curious about I'm very curious about what the implications here will be for future leakers. If as the Trump administration has insisted, there has been no classified information shared here, then does that mean that CIA analysts couldn't share similar information? Like, what would the ramifications of that be? And of course, we all know that this information would typically be classified. These are important details. I mean, weapons, F-18s, MQ-9 drones, to have the details of that information, the timing of it, the sequence, that would certainly be secret information, information that a foreign adversary would want to act upon. One
Yeah,
one other part of this that I find so interesting though, Steve, is that, you know, President Trump is so frazzled by the fact that this is still a story that's been in the headlines. You know, he's gone back to saying this is the radical left's witch hunt. And he did call it a never ending story. Um, but it's of course the fact that Goldberg had the contact information, or sorry, that Mike Waltz had the contact information for Jeffrey Goldberg in his cell phone, that seems to have rattled Trump more than the fact that the contents of a military strike were discussed in an insecure platform.
I've had Tara Palmieri on this podcast and on the Substack Lives a couple times, and she makes the point about the absurdity, um, the ludicrous absurdity that these people don't talk to reporters. The MAGA chieftains all have the phone numbers of all the top reporters on speed dial. How does Trump not know that? Do you, when you talk to people, that they now are dealing with this reality that you know who you talk to, you know that they all talk to reporters, and now if Trump finds out that they talk to reporters, it does two things, right? It undermines them with Trump, but the idea that within the Trump court that you can undermine a rival by making it seem that that person is talking to reporters and elevate yourself means that, right, in a dark room, there's always somebody there ready to plunge a knife into your back, and that's the world we're living in. But that's incredible to me. He doesn't know.
But see, he has numbers of journalists too in his phone. I mean, he
Hmm.
talks to journalists too. So I think in a way it's like everybody's trying to save face in a different way. I mean, Mike Waltz himself has denied that he knew Goldberg. He kind of made it sound like, his number just sort of somehow entered his phone magically from a Fox News interview recently. And he even called him like a low scum, something like that. I don't remember the exact bottom of the scum of journalists,
Yeah.
which of course, I think is not quite a fair depiction of any journalist at the Atlantic. And then there are these photos that emerge, right, from the, I believe it was Daily Mail, which put Goldberg and Waltz in the same place at the same time, standing right by
Yeah.
each other. I mean, but again, it's like Waltz is in the hot seat. He talks to journalists, but he needs to be able to hold on. So he's going to say the things that Trump says. Trump says Goldberg is a sleazebag. Well, I'm going to go call him scum and try to stay in Trump's good graces. But I mean,
So you have a couple of things going on, and I just want to welcome everybody to the conversation tonight. We have 2,200 of you joining. We are having a conversation about the intelligence community, some of the implications. We're doing that with Sasha Ingber. Sasha, you can find at Human Intelligence, Human on Substack. You can find Sasha at the Spy Museum podcast. And I think one of the more interesting journalists covering all of this. And this is, again, one of the more incredible stories, that I can recall, if not the most incredible of my lifetime. And I just want to set the stage for two things that are happening. Trump reacts like a mad king, tries to wave this away. But the implication is a team of imbeciles got together on a signal chat. One of them was in Moscow. They disclosed the timing of the attack, the weapons packages, the order of the attack, thus, the positions of the aircraft carriers and the battle fleet in one of the most egregious breakdowns of competence and intelligence in American history, without exaggeration. Trump's response is typical, is to lash out at the media, at the Democrats, at Joe Biden, at Hillary Clinton, at everybody. But it's his team. They're responsible for the conduct. The National Security Advisor added the Atlantic executive editor. The reason the Atlantic executive editor is in the phone of Trump's national security advisor is Trump's national security advisor, is in contact with the executive editor of The Atlantic. He's a source of the executive editor of The Atlantic. He's a journalist and talks to sources. And that's obvious by the fact, not through anything that Jeffrey Goldberg disclosed, but what Mike Waltz disclosed by adding Jeffrey Goldberg to a group chat that meets every definition of the director of national intelligence guidance, that this would be classified as top secret or beyond top secret into compartmentalized information categories. At the same time that this is happening today, Donald Trump, like in a Bugs Bunny cartoon, went on television and detonated the global economy. Detonated it. And so the reaction to this, as markets spread around the world in their opening, will be one of chaos and panic. Prices will rise, inflation will rise. As always, the poorest people in the society will be hurt uh, and victimized, but none of this will be hidden. All of it will be experienced. And so, less than 100 days out, less than 100 days into this, we're now moving, in my estimation, into some really dangerous territories. And so that's what's happening in the world, in the Trump administration right now. Tremendous assault on civil liberties. I want to talk about long history, the intelligence services involved in secret wars in South America,
Mm.
in Central America. Uh, we have an agreement with a dictator in El Salvador who had run quiet. He's very popular. He has an 86% approval level because he has restored order against the gangs in his country. He's a young guy. I think he's 36, 37. And now he's really asserting himself with Trump in the office. And he has established a hell on earth in El Salvador and Gulag. And he has imprisoned, I think, 2% of the population in a place that makes the supermax look like a look like a Sunday school. And so a Maryland man was picked up by ICE as he was picking up his 5-year old autistic son, no due process, shipped out of the country to the prison in El Salvador. And the Trump administration acknowledges within the last 72 hours, oops, but we can't get him back. So, where do the intelligence agencies intersect here as they're operating? What do you have a sense of what's going on? It seems that there's some groups that have deportation lists. Is the government following these outside groups' deportation lists and handing them to law enforcement? Does ICE have intelligence? Are they relying on FBI? What is happening? How does somebody get assessed, caught up when they're taking their autistic kid, right, picking up their autistic kid from school and wind up in the El Salvadorian gulag? From an intelligence perspective, how does that happen?
That is a really good question, Steve. And I think that we don't quite know. I mean, ICE. absolutely does have intelligence. We're talking about the Department of Homeland Security. There is within the Department of Homeland Security the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, which is part of the complex system of intelligence agencies that look at threats to the homeland. Of course, the FBI as well. There is a fluid transfer of information between Homeland Security and the FBI. Uh, I don't know if this ultimately relates to what we saw a few weeks ago when there were several people who were put on a plane that went to El Salvador as a federal district judge had filed an injunction leading to the Trump administration not following a court order. If in as we saw there was haste in getting them on the plane. If there really should have been and could have been more deliberation in assessing who these people were. I mean, even in that situation, they were alleged to have been criminals, but it's my understanding that that was an allegation. Even, of course, the case of this man is incredibly sad. The fact that it's now being said that finding him, locating him, and bringing him back to the United States will be hard and could take a long time. You have to think about how that man must feel sitting on the floor behind bars tonight with people that he doesn't belong with. I mean, it's a tragic situation, and I I wonder if the United States, the CIA, is going to be talking to other countries that could provide more information to try to help this person, or if that would even be a priority when right now this administration is looking at ways to counter China, ways to try to stop the war between Ukraine and Russia. You know, Trump had wanted to do that within the first 100 days. So, where does this fall in the list of priorities? In terms of the intelligence community, I would have to say that this probably isn't on the top 3 or even top 5 of the priorities.
What what I would say about it though is the politicization of intelligence that we saw in the Bush administration years, that outcomes that were desired were achieved through selective interpretation, and that's the most generous interpretation
Hmm.
of what happened.
Hmm.
And so what I was talking about earlier, in a 10-year run of really everybody who's had access to classified information, it seems, um, hasn't been able to handle it, both parties. But when you look at this moment right now, where no one can tell Trump no without
Hmm.
serious repercussions, and they want an outcome, which is we're going to fly plane loads of U.S. Air Force jets full of dark skinned people with tattoos, including the guy from Maryland who is picking up his autistic kid, including the barber. What that suggests to me is a corruption that seeps everywhere as an intelligence function, particularly in intelligence services that are led under an umbrella of agencies by a director of national intelligence who's asked a question about, hey, you're retweeting a state Russian TV guy. And she says, like a 12-year-old, as I pointed out earlier, hey, I have my First Amendment rights.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's like my concern in that is the drift into, what will be that
Hmm.
intelligence version of what I would say is the quackery you're seeing in the public health services by Robert Kennedy. It's a different version of the same thing.
The concern of intelligence being politicized, those are conversations that I have had. A couple weeks ago, even on Spycast, I interviewed Valerie Plame, who had been outed by the Bush administration after the US invaded Iraq based on faulty intelligence that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And she told me very clearly that she's concerned that this administration will put pressure on analysts and that they're essentially the system has not changed. There haven't been any mechanisms or protections put in place since she was outed. Her husband had written a New York Times opinion piece saying, I saw no evidence of yellow cake in Niger, which was what was the basis of this theory, which was proven to be correct in time, that his words were correct. But Valerie Plame, then her identity was leaked to the Washington Post, so she's telling me about how this is her fear that this could very well happen. I'm not sure that the case that you're describing necessarily fits that category. I think that an area where a lot of intelligence officers are very concerned right now is in the negotiations with Russia over Ukraine. We have seen President Trump making public remarks about how Putin's pissed him off and, are you sticking to the ceasefire? Are you going to really do this? But then he still goes harder on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. We're back to you better sign this minerals deal. And and so I think that that's an area where a lot of people have really spent their time raising their eyebrows, and they don't know what it looks like moving forward. Ukraine has been a long-term intelligence partner to the United States and has provided valuable intelligence on Russia. And while the United States is making this Black Sea deal with Russia, which would essentially help Russia and their economy, I believe it was the same day the annual threat assessment came out, which discussed all of the threats that Russia poses to the United States. So it's still clear that Russia is an adversary. And, going back to Signalgate here, Mike Waltz has been the one who has been most criticized for having brought Goldberg into the conversation. But it's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth who provided some of the most damning and damaging information in the group. Okay, John Ratcliffe also apparently disclosed the identity of a CIA officer, which Goldberg did not disclose. He protected that information so we wouldn't have another Valerie Plame. But it's interesting that Waltz is the one who has been sitting in the hot seat most, because Waltz has also been a major supporter of Ukraine's defense. I mean, I was just kind of thinking about who he is and what his background is, and like, I could sit here and read you some quotes from him from 2022. He said, the Ukrainian people have shown spirit, heart, and productiveness. They now need all the guns, tanks, and planes capable to defeat Russia militarily and retake Crimea, which Ukraine had seen seized by the Russians in 2014, and the Donbass in the east to restore their borders. 2023. I think it's absolutely in America's interest to stop Putin cold. However, the era of blank checks for aid, at least coming from Congress, is over. Then we move into 2024, and he's more in line with Trump. There's also the things that he said about Trump when he was running, questioning whether Trump was really fit for leading the country. He was critical of the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, which is something that Trump helped create with the Doha Agreement before the Biden administration executed, which what was a very chaotic and disorganized evacuation from the country. So the fact that Waltz, who has typically and historically supported Ukraine, is the one who might face the most damage from this conversation, despite the fact that other people shared information that might have been worse, is concerning. And I think uh, I know people who work in the IC who find it a very, very rattling that he's the one that seems to be who seems to have had his job in the most jeopardy thus far. Of course, we know that White House Press Secretary Carolyn Levitt has said, we're just going to move on. He's still a member of the team. But I'm sure he was sweating for a few days there, Steve.
What um is going on with, let's say, your career intelligence officer, whether they're in operations, whether they're undercover? Are people considering retiring, getting out? Like, if you jump out of the plane at 10,000 feet and you pull your ripcord at 2,000, wh- where are where is morale on the free fall?
Yeah, you know, I have to start by saying that there are some people inside the CIA who are supportive of what Trump is doing. This is not a monolith. There have always been Democrats and Republicans on the inside. But among those who do not support what Trump is doing, this is a very distressing time. There are people that I've talked to for years who are like, I'm scared that I'm going to get
Well,
polygraphed.
who
And I'm not.
who
Mhm.
supports what he's doing inside the American intelligence community? What is it that they support? Did they support the assailing of the NATO alliance, the sucking up to Putin, the assault on Zelensky? What is titillating them?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that I know more people who take issue with Trump's words on Ukraine. I haven't met any pro-Russian intelligence officers in the CIA, but there are people that I talk to inside who tell me that there are some people who are quite happy, and one area specifically is on the diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. They feel that pushing in that direction has brought the agency in a state of mind that takes them away from operations, which is where they need to focus their energy. I mean, in the FBI, there are a lot of, old school, let's not do the counterintelligence. We don't need to focus on that. We just need to continue on law enforcement. So that would be where the Trump supporters are inside the FBI. But in the counterintelligence analysis world, there's a contingent within that world that doesn't agree with Trump. I mean, I'm speaking in some generalities here,
Right.
but there is that generality there. But what I was saying before, I've talked to people who are really scared to talk now. Gabbard has really started to indicate that they will be closely watching people. We've seen them go after communications from the internal systems for inappropriate conversations nonetheless. But there are some who have said to me, I'm worried that I'll get polygraphed and I'll get asked whether or not I speak with journalists. There's fear of what might happen in the event of that. I mean, I still know some who are angry, and that can create a different response. Um, but it in terms of who's going to stay, who's going to leave, there are some who are close to retirement who are very thankful for the fact that they are close to retirement. But we're talking about people who have spent years in these jobs, training for these jobs, and fighting for their country. And so this is not the kind of thing that you can easily let go of. And it's something that a lot of people are very passionate about. I told you about Valerie Plame, who, by the way, does this spy cruise that's happening in the summertime and is worth people checking out. I think it's called Spies at Sea.
Hmm.
But she talked about how heartbreaking it was for her to have to leave her life as an undercover officer. And she could have stayed at the CIA with her identity being revealed, but that wasn't the same kind of work that she wanted to do. And people are not taking these jobs for the money. They're not taking these jobs for fame. You're supposed to be unknown. So to leave that, especially when you might be in the middle of your career, when you also see the threats that the United States is facing and how it's evolved and how technology has made it even more complicated, to step away from that is painful.
I was saying like the collapse of morale that comes in an organization when people realize I'm held to a standard that my commander is not. People have never ever followed those people, not for 500 years of military history. Right? This is the most fundamental concept of being a captain of a ship, which is probably the simplest concept to understand. And this all happened at sea. If you're the captain of the ship, you have a lot of prerogatives, you have a lot of authority, and you have absolute accountability. If the ship blows up, well, you're on shore having dinner. Whose fault is that?
Hmm.
It's the captain's fault, not the first officer's fault. And so I had these concepts drilled into my brain at age 12 in the Boy Scouts. And so it's extraordinary watching the Secretary of Defense and State and Director of National Intelligence just blithely reject them. And basically, the Trump administration response has been pound sand. Whatever. We gave away the positions. And I don't think that the American people like it as a political proposition in any of this. But I'm wondering amongst the career people, to me, in an organization, I would believe that it landed like a solar plexus punch. That it just took the breath out of people. Like, holy fuck.
Hmm. Well,
Really? All of them? The whole deal? Or maybe not. And if it's a not, that raises a whole different set of issues for me.
yeah, I mean, I don't think that there is anybody who is happy with the transgression on Signal. I have to go back to Trump's first term. People inside the intelligence community watched Trump stand at a podium next to Putin in Helsinki and side with Putin on his insistence that Russia had not involved itself in the 2016 election, despite the US intelligence community's assessment that it had. So the CIA and all of the intel agencies are familiar with the dynamics here. This is also a place, speaking specifically to CIA, that is very mission oriented. So while there is frustration and disappointment, uh, there are a lot of people who are going to just stick their head down and they're going to keep doing their work because they care about the country and that's what they want to do. And I'll tell you that there are questions about the relationship with Israel, because think about the ways that Israeli intelligence has been compromised by the United States in the last few years. I mean, just last year alone, a CIA analyst leaked two documents from the NSA and the National Geospatial Intel Agency that was supposed to be for the Five Eyes. And this was about the ways that Israel was planning to retaliate against Iran. That information was leaked by the United States, by someone inside the CIA. Go back to Trump's first term in the Oval Office. He talks to two Russians, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, and he tells them about intelligence that comes from a very well placed Israeli spy inside ISIS, that ISIS had found a way to implant explosive devices inside laptops to evade airport security. So, in all of these instances, important Israeli intelligence has been shared, in one case, even by President Trump himself. And this has to be very upsetting to the Israelis. Of course, the Europeans are also concerned about what they see take place. But the question is, where do these intelligence relationships go? There are places that the United States has great access, and there are places where the United States has to rely on other countries. And will Trump strong arm them into continuing to share intelligence? I mean, we're not going to see minerals deals with other countries the way that we do with Ukraine. So it's going to be up to them to decide what they want to share, how much, how frequently, when they want to share it. And I think that that keeps a lot of intelligence officers up at night. Now, with Israel specifically, there's a lot of alignment on the Middle East region and the fact that Israel is grateful that this administration struck the Houthis harder than the Biden administration, that this administration supports the decisions they make on Iran and the whole area at large. And we've now seen Netanyahu himself be emboldened enough to not just signal and move to have the head of Shin Bet, which is Israel's domestic security agency, from being removed, but now he has named his successor, even though Ronan Bar, the head of Shin Bet, is still around. Where does that come from? I think it actually comes from a closeness to President Trump and the fact that this relationship still continues. But I do think that inside CIA and other agencies, the letting go of officers and the intel sharing are really big concerns. In addition to seeing the signal chat exchange.
Um, do you talk to people that are really pessimistic about the next 3 years, that where this is all going, right? To a terrible place.
I
Go,
mean,
could take us inside your kind of like your outer kind of pessimistic circle of sources, where you say, not someone who you think is off the wall, but somebody you think is, wow, that's kind of the furthest out fence, that's a dark vision, worst case, and that's like, wow, that's like, oof, like that kind of gets you.
yeah, I mean, I think that there are issues and moments where people get upset and then they continue to do their work. It's hard to think of one specific example off the top of my head. I do think that this is a moment that has been hard for a lot of people in the intelligence community. Seeing this administration, seeing narratives that uh, don't necessarily stack up to fact. I mean, if we go back to the Oval Office visit between Trump and Zelensky, where Trump essentially, in the days leading into it, had called Zelensky a dictator who wouldn't hold elections, even though Ukraine won't hold elections during wartime, according to their own constitution, time of military changes. So the narrative that Trump put forth is very much at odds with what the CIA officers have seen. That's very upsetting. I think that that is demoralizing. This is not a time, but I will also say that I've come across people who want to get into intelligence, who want to be part of national security, and so again, it's there isn't one story at play here. And I also think that I think that the longer term vision of where this country goes is what's keeping a lot of people uh, very very worried right now. What happens a year from now? What happens in the years ahead?
For sure, a lot of anxiety out there in the country right now. Big protests on April 5th. A lot of the techs and traffic down below on that. Let me, as we come to the end of the hour, appreciate everybody, getting on tonight, and you can follow Sasha at Human. I love the Spy Museum podcast that Sasha does. It's really, really fascinating. Let me just talk about politics for a second. Sasha's a journalist, not a political consultant. She doesn't do opinions; she does facts, and can't have opinions without facts, which is why we have opinions that are factual, and that's important. So let me make a couple of points. The first is yesterday was a bad day for Donald Trump. And it was a frightening day if you were one of the vulnerable members of Congress. There are three elections in the last 124 years on a midterm where the incumbent president's party has picked up seats. I was one of the top strategists on one of those three times. The next time will not be a fourth. It will be devastating. The tsunami is coming. You saw it in Wisconsin. You saw Cory Booker take to the floor of the United States Senate and talk for 25 hours. It was extraordinary. Now, any senator could have done it, but Cory Booker did it. And here's the deal, and a lot of people aren't going to like this, but I think that effectively ended Kamala Harris's future presidential campaign because it killed the scripted politician who can't talk extemporaneously. So it's just a threshold requirement. If you can't talk in English, you can't speak with conviction, you speak in an English derivative and platitudes, it's not going to be your year. So huge night for Cory Booker, and it invigorated, I think, a lot of excitement in the Senate. I think you look in the last week, Jim Himes in the House. You look at Jamie Raskin talking about the rule of law. You see voices that are beginning to emerge now in a new age, in a new era of politics that we're at the very beginning of. You see a 37-year-old former staffer taking on Brad Sherman in Los Angeles, right? So I think you see a lot of people in their 50s, in their 40s, in their 30s in politics, in office, standing up right now. And I think you see that playing out in the Democratic Party. Donald Trump's numbers are at record lows this soon in. Politically, he's past apogee. He's like the fat orange guy falling past your window if you live on a skyscraper, descending at a very quick pace to the ground, picking up speed as he goes. Arrogance of power is nothing new. But as you see Trump's collapse early, what it will do, it will draw in top tier candidates, reform candidates, tough candidates, candidates that want to make a difference because there's going to be a lot of things that have to be fixed in the aftermath, a lot of things that need to be repaired in the country. For now, we are in an American crisis. Have no doubt about that. The assaults on the Constitution are real. The abductions by agents on the street are real. The assault on civil liberties is real. The chill over the newsrooms is real. It's all real. The malice, the menace, all of it. So it is a moment in time where I urge you, let go of the past. Who did what to who in the 1984 election? Let it go. Ronald Reagan would have been against this. Everyone would have been against this. Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford were the two presidents who had the closest friendship of any former presidents. They ran against one another. The crisis is an American crisis. It doesn't matter what your politics are. The issue in the moment is about forming an opposition that can make the things that have to stop as soon as possible. And what brings the stoppage as soon as possible is the steepness of his descent. And so tomorrow is going to be a brutal day for the stock markets. It's going to be down thousands of points. What he did today on the global economy, but all of it is going to have the effect of in the end collapsing his approval levels. I just drove across the country from Los Angeles to Palm Springs to Tucson to El Paso to Fort Worth to Vicksburg to Tupelo to Nashville to Pittsburgh to Buffalo and on up to Toronto. And what I want to say is that it's a big, giant country. And it wasn't until I drove through Kentucky that I saw my first Trump flag. There's not a movement out there. There was an election. And now people are going to suffer from the consequences of a choice. Trump produces a television show every evening. It runs all day long and it's disorienting. But he doesn't push a button in Washington with an effect in Tupelo, Mississippi. There's a lot of people in the country who are poor, a lot of people in the country who believed in him. They're going to be disappointed and they're going to be hurt. And it's easy to look down on those people and it's easy to want to yell at them. I want to yell at some of them. But you can't. One of the places I stopped on the way here was Abraham Lincoln's birthplace. And it's astonishing. On the site where he was born, recreation in a stone mausoleum, this two-room cabin that was original to 1840, not his, but with malice towards none. And that's going to be the great test is all of the abused people, all of the people that were lied to, all of the people who said, this guy, we can trust him. He's different. He's authentic. But he's going to do for the country what he did for Atlantic City, which was nothing except hurt it. And so, um, as I get ready to say goodnight, there's an old saying that the years are long. Excuse me. Yes, the days are long, the years are short, and we're going to experience some of that. Winston Churchill had a quote: "You do your worst, we will do our best," and that's what we'll have to do for all of you out there on April 5th. March with the American flag. Hold it high. That's the values you are marching to defend. You're not marching against your country, you're marching for your country. You're marching against Trump for your country. Um, when you protest, you are embracing this country's most fundamental ideals. When you say no, when you dissent, when you stand up and you say stop. And so get out there, get involved. The American people will be the force that puts a stop to this, all over the world. I was in Vietnam last year. There's some entrepreneur out there in a country where America killed 1 million Vietnamese. And this country loves America. And it's geopolitically, strategically very important in our long term competition and strategic challenges with China. And we just destabilized the country, and it's a nascent ally despite the war. And so the stupidity at hand is indescribable. The consequences are unavoidable. And everyone in this country is going to feel them. It's going to be hard and tough. We're going to have more poor people. We're going to have more hungry kids. At some level, the forward progress of humanity itself has come to a peak. The cancellation of medical science, research, brain science, cancer research across the board. What has been found out and discovered edge will take a step back from before we go forward again. And so the damage being done is epic. Um, it's sad, but it's got to raise your indignation, and it's got to raise your desire to get involved and not lie down. Last thing I want to share with you is this: is that in Jackson, Mississippi, went to the home of Medgar Evers, who was killed on June the 12th, of 1963, in his driveway. When you go into Medgar Evers' house, the only bed in this small, green, modest 1950s era house in a segregated black neighborhood with a carport, the only bed that was raised off the floor was his and his wife's, Mrs. Evers, Murley Evers. And the kids, their beds were on the floor below the windowsill, below the glass. And well, Medgar Evers, he was the secretary of the NAACP, but he was really the straw that stirred the drink in Mississippi. He had his hand in every group and every facet. He was the indispensable leader. And he broke the cotton curtain. He went on television in 1963, Mississippi, and he told the truth about segregation. And the truth is, up until then, the line on television was that black people had it good in Mississippi, right? Keep out the outside agitators, communists, exactly what reporters were called by Carolyn Levitt from the White House podium, who are inquiring and seeking truth. Agitators, communists, called down, shouted down, all of it. And so Medgar Evers went on television, and white Mississippi went crazy. Went crazy. And as he was unloading his trunk, he was shot in the back by Byron Della Beckwith. The bullet went through his back, through the house, through a wall, bounced off his refrigerator, and landed on the counter where Murley Evers cooked dinner for her children. And they were getting ready to watch John Kennedy deliver a speech on civil rights. As Medgar Evers, laying in a pool of his blood, crawled towards the door. This man was a Normandy veteran. He was a veteran of the Red Ball Express. He fought in constant combat from June of 1944 to May of 1945. He was gunned down like an animal, but as it was said at the time, he was buried like a king in Arlington National Cemetery on the orders of the President of the United States. And such was his faith and his love of his state that killed him in some ways, that his is one of the very few gravestones that has the name of his state spelled out in its entirety, no abbreviation. Mississippi, Mississippi. And so when you think about Medgar Evers, there's a question. Why didn't he leave? Why didn't he go? Pack up. All he had to do was go away. Stop trying to get black people to vote. I went to the spot where the civil rights workers were killed in 1963 on Route 19, shot and murdered by the Ku Klux Klan and by policemen. Why were they there? They were there because they were American patriots. And there's a time of great contestation in this country over our most fundamental values that require every American to be involved in the fight. There is nobody who does not have involvement in this fight. Indifference is a position. You stand with MAGA. Everybody has to make a decision. Everybody. So with that, I say goodnight to you and wish all of you good luck on April the 5th. Stay safe.
Thank you,
Hang tough.
Steve.
I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning. I invite you to join this community where I promise to be honest, blunt, and direct about what is happening in this country. America is in crisis. Follow and subscribe to this channel and on Substack. Thank you.